Imagine for a moment that one of the most influential Vikings, Ragnar Lothbrok, the very symbol of Viking strength, bravery, and leadership, doesn't die in a pit of snakes. Instead, Ragnar survives his brutal end at the hands of King of Northumbria and continues to lead the Viking forces. What happens next? Would the Viking world as we know it be forever altered? Would the Viking Age last longer? Or perhaps even change its direction entirely? In today's video, we're going to explore this fascinating alternate history scenario. We'll dive into how Ragnar Lothbrok's survival might have reshaped the Viking world, changed the fate of the Vikings, and ultimately alter the course of European history. So, get ready to journey back to a world where Ragnar didn't meet his tragic death and led the Vikings into even more epic adventures. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you'll see how one man's continued life could have changed everything we know about the Vikings. Ragnar Lothbrok is undoubtedly one of the most legendary figures in Viking history. His name alone evokes images of fierce raids, unyielding leadership, and tactical brilliance. The Vikings of the 9th century were some of the most feared and respected warriors in all of Europe, and much of their success can be traced back to Ragnar's charisma, cunning, and battle-hardened leadership. His death, however, marked a turning point in Viking history. Ragnar's capture and subsequent execution by King of Northumbria left a void, one that his sons, though formidable in their own right, struggled to fill. His death not only divided the Viking tribes, but also led to a series of power struggles that weakened the unified force that Ragnar had so skillfully led. But what if Ragnar had survived? What if his death had been avoided, and he continued to lead the Vikings for years, if not decades more? In this video, we'll explore how Ragnar's extended life could have changed the Viking Age. Could his survival have led to an even stronger Viking empire, one that might have dominated much of Europe? Let's find out by looking at the possible outcomes of a world where Ragnar Lothbrok lived longer. What if Ragnar had lived longer? To understand the full impact of Ragnar's survival, we need to think about how his leadership shaped Viking society. Ragnar was not just a warrior. He was a visionary who united the Vikings in ways few could have. His influence extended far beyond mere conquest. He was a symbol of Viking ideals. Let's break down the main ways his extended life could have changed Viking history. 1. Ragnar's leadership and unifying influence on the Vikings. Ragnar Lothbrok was an extraordinary leader, able to command loyalty not just through fear, but through respect and admiration. His death marked the loss of that unity. After Ragnar's execution, his sons, while undoubtedly skilled warriors, often pursued different ambitions, leading to conflict that weakened the Vikings' overall power. If Ragnar had lived longer, his leadership would have prevented these divisions. He had an incredible ability to bring together different Viking factions, despite their differences, and unite them under one banner. Ragnar's death left a void that was difficult to fill, and as his sons pursued their individual goals, they often came into conflict with each other. This fragmentation of power prevented the Vikings from being as effective as they could have been. Ragnar's survival would have allowed him to maintain this unifying force, keeping the Vikings focused on their common goals: expansion, conquest, and exploration. The power of the Viking war bands would have remained consolidated under one strong leader, making them an even more formidable force in Europe. A united Viking front would have meant more coordinated and powerful raids, potentially expanding Viking influence even further into regions like Britain, France, and beyond. 2. Expansion of Viking territories in England and France. One of Ragnar's greatest achievements was his raids on the British Isles. His attacks on England, particularly his siege of Paris, showed that Ragnar was capable of leading the Vikings into lands previously thought inaccessible. His death caused a shift in Viking strategy, and his sons, though talented, often allowed personal vendettas and rivalries to guide their actions. Had Ragnar survived, the Vikings' hold on England and France could have been even more entrenched. Ragnar was not only a fierce warrior, but also a savvy diplomat. He had the foresight to understand the value of establishing lasting Viking settlements. If Ragnar had continued his reign, the Vikings could have expanded their territories in both England and France. In England, Ragnar's survival would likely have meant that the Viking forces could continue to pressure the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, particularly during the reigns of Alfred the Great and his successors. The Anglo-Saxon kingdoms had to deal with Viking raids, But Ragnar's presence could have led to a more united Viking force, one capable of creating permanent settlements across the island. It's not difficult to imagine Ragnar establishing more Viking strongholds, solidifying their control, and perhaps even carving out a more significant portion of England under Viking rule. Similarly, in France, Ragnar's ability to build alliances and leverage Viking power could have allowed the Vikings to establish more settlements and perhaps even become a more recognized political force. Instead of fragmented Viking groups attacking from all sides, Ragnar could have created a more structured, unified Viking presence, one that can negotiate terms with French kings or even challenge them directly for power. 3. The sons of Ragnar, greater unity and power. Ragnar's sons, Bjorn Ironside, Ivar the Boneless, Sigurd Snake in the Eye, and Nub, were some of the most famous Viking leaders in their own right. But after Ragnar's death, they often found themselves at odds, competing for dominance and seeking personal glory. Ragnar was the glue that held them together. If he had lived longer, his wisdom and experience would have helped guide his sons. Rather than pursuing their own separate goals, Ragnar could have kept them united, leading to a more coordinated effort. Bjorn might have been able to expand Viking influence even further. Ivar's brilliance might have been used a devastating effect without the burden of revenge, and Sigurd and Ub could have worked with their brothers, instead of being scattered and divided. Ragnar's continued influence would have likely prevented the internal conflicts that arose after his death. His sons, without the influence of their father, often made decisions based on emotion or personal ambition, sometimes leading to disastrous outcomes. With Ragnar alive, there would have been a sense of balance and unity within the Viking leadership, and the Vikings could have achieved even greater success in their raids, settlements, and political ambitions. 4. Preservation of Viking culture and way of life. Viking culture was shaped by the likes of Ragnar Lothbrok. He was not just a conqueror, but a symbol of the Viking spirit, bravery, exploration, and conquest. The Viking way of life was built on the idea that the Vikings were warriors first, and their raids were a way to secure glory and wealth. But after Ragnar's death, Viking culture began to shift. With Ragnar no longer at the helm, many of his sons, particularly Bjorn Ironside, leaned toward establishing permanent settlements and pursuing more peaceful ventures. If Ragnar had lived, the Viking culture might have remained more warlike for a longer period. Ragnar's emphasis on raids, conquests, and expanding Viking territories would have kept the Viking focus on warfare and exploration. His survival would have allowed the Vikings to continue in their old ways for decades, keeping the spirit of adventure, raiding, and glory alive. Ragnar's continued reign could have delayed the transition to more peaceful Viking settlements. Instead of focusing on farming, trading, and diplomacy, the Vikings might have continued their path of conquest, adding more lands to their empire and ensuring their presence in Europe for even longer. Viking raids could have intensified, and with Ragnar still leading, they might have been even more successful, causing greater disruption to the established European powers. 5. Political ramifications across Europe. Ragnar's survival would have sent shockwave across Europe. The Vikings were already a major political force during Ragnar's time, and his death left a vacuum that other kingdoms, particularly England and France, were eager to fill. Ragnar's death allowed the Anglo-Saxons, led by kings like Alfred the Great, to push back against the Viking threat and even reclaim territory. But if Ragnar had lived, the Vikings would have remained a formidable political force. For the Anglo-Saxons, Ragnar's survival meant continued Viking pressure. Ragnar might have played a role in influencing the political landscape in England, either by making alliances with local rulers or by continuing to launch attacks on Anglo-Saxon territories. His leadership could have delayed the rise of the Anglo-Saxon kingdom or altered the outcome of the Viking invasions in England entirely. In France, Ragnar's survival would have kept the Vikings at the forefront of European politics. His diplomacy could have led to more successful negotiations, alliances, and settlements in the region, possibly making the Vikings even more entrenched in France. Instead of fading into the background, Viking influence might have continued to grow, leading to more power struggles and possibly even more Viking-controlled territories in Western Europe. The influence on Viking strategy and tactics. Ragnar Lothbrok wasn't just a leader, he was a master strategist. His understanding of battle tactics and his ability to lead his warriors to victory were key factors in the success of the Viking raids. If Ragnar had survived longer, his expertise would have continued to influence Viking military strategies, leading to even greater success on the battlefield. One of the key elements of Viking warfare was their ability to strike quickly and efficiently. Ragnar was known for his lightning fast raids, often catches enemies off guard and overwhelming them before they had a chance to respond. This hit and run tactic was incredibly effective in the early stages of the Viking Age, and if Ragnar had continued to lead, it's likely that the Vikings would have refined their approach even further. Ragnar's deep understanding of terrain, timing, and psychological warfare made him an exceptional tactician. Under his continued leadership, Viking raids could have become even more precise and coordinated, targeting the most vulnerable points in enemy defenses. His ability to read the battlefield and make split-second decisions would have given the Vikings a significant advantage over their enemies. Additionally, Ragnar's experience with naval warfare was unparalleled. The Vikings were known for their longships, which allowed them to travel great distances and raid along rivers, coasts, and inland waterways. Ragnar's naval expertise could have led to the development of even more advanced ships and tactics, further enhancing the Vikings' ability to dominate the seas. His continued involvement in naval operations could have kept the Vikings at the forefront of maritime warfare, allowing them to control vital trade routes and establish more settlements across the seas. Viking diplomacy and Ragnar's role in European politics. While the Vikings are often remembered for their raids and battles, they were also skilled diplomats. Ragnar Lothbrok was not only a warlord, but also a shrewd negotiator who understood the value of alliances. His survival would have had a significant impact on Viking diplomacy, potentially changing the political landscape of Europe. Throughout his life, Ragnar was known for forming alliances with other kingdoms. He understood that sometimes diplomacy could achieve more than brute force, and he knew when to negotiate and when to fight. If Ragnar had lived longer, it's likely that he would continue to build diplomatic ties with various European rulers, further strengthening the Viking presence in the region. In England, Ragnar's survival could have meant the continuation of his relationship with King Ecgbert of Wessex. Ragnar's alliance with Ecgbert was based on mutual respect, and Ragnar had a unique ability to strike deals that benefited both parties. If he had lived, this alliance could have become even stronger, with Ragnar and Ecgbert working together to fend off common enemies or expand their territories. Ragnar's diplomatic skills could have also played a key role in Viking interactions with the Frankish Empire. Charlemagne and his descendants were often at odds with the Vikings, but Ragnar's ability to negotiate could have led to peace agreements or alliances. With his guidance, the Vikings might have been able to establish lasting settlements in France and even influence the politics of the Frankish kingdom. The Frankish Empire was a dominant power in Europe, and Ragnar's diplomacy could have shifted the balance of power in favor of the Vikings. Furthermore, Ragnar's survival could have led to stronger Viking ties with the Irish kingdoms. The Vikings had already established a presence in Ireland, with cities like Dublin becoming major centers of Viking power. If Ragnar had lived, his leadership could have solidified these alliances, allowing the Vikings to establish even more influence in Ireland and further expand their territory. Ragnar's impact on Viking religion and beliefs. Ragnar Lothbrok was deeply connected to the Viking gods and their religious practices. As a symbol of Viking ideals, he embodied the values of strength, courage, and honor, which were central to the Viking worldview. If Ragnar had survived longer, his influence on Viking religion and beliefs could have had a profound impact on the Norse pantheon and the way Viking society viewed the gods. Ragnar was a man who believed in fate and destiny, and he often spoke of a connection to the gods, particularly Odin. He saw himself as chosen by the gods to lead the Vikings in battle and to bring glory to their name. If Ragnar had lived longer, his influence could have inspired future generations of Vikings to maintain a strong connection to their faith and the old ways. His survival might have led to a resurgence in Viking religious practices, as he could have used his position as a leader to reinforce the importance of the gods in Viking society. In a time when many European kingdoms were beginning to convert to Christianity, Ragnar's survival could have helped preserve Norse paganism for a longer period. The Vikings might have continued to follow the old gods and uphold their traditions, delaying the widespread adoption of Christianity in Scandinavia. Ragnar's legacy as a religious figure could have also influenced the way Vikings viewed death and the afterlife. He was known to have embraced the idea of dying in battle and being welcomed into Valhalla, the Hall of the Slain, where warriors were honored by Odin. His continued life would have reinforced this belief and ensured that the Viking warrior culture remained centered around the idea of glory in battle and honor in death. Moreover, Ragnar's children, who were all raised in the Viking tradition, would have been exposed to his beliefs. If he had lived longer, he could have passed down his knowledge of Viking religion and philosophy, ensuring that his children would continue to carry the torch of Norse faith. This could have had a significant impact on the religious practices of the Viking Age, potentially delaying the Christianization of Scandinavia. The role of Ragnar in shaping Viking society and culture. Ragnar's death marked the beginning of significant cultural shifts in Viking society. While the Vikings were known for their raiding and warlike ways, they were also a deeply cultural people. Their sagas, stories, and traditions were an integral part of Viking life. Ragnar, as a legendary figure, was immortalized in these sagas, and his influence on Viking culture cannot be overstated. Had Ragnar survived, he would have continued to shape Viking culture through his personal story and his leadership. His deeds and accomplishments would have been passed down through the generations, becoming the subject of even more sagas and tales. Ragnar's influence on Viking literature and culture would have been immense, as his survival would have provided more material for the poets and skalds who chronicled Viking history. Ragnar's continued presence could have also helped preserve the Viking warrior ethos. He was the epitome of the Viking warrior, brave, fierce, and unyielding in battle. His leadership set the standard for future generations of Vikings, and his example would have continued to inspire them to follow the warrior code. If Ragnar had lived, the Viking culture of raiding, honor, and exploration might have existed for a longer period, keeping the spirit of the Viking Age alive. Additionally, Ragnar's survival might have led to more Viking settlements and the establishment of Viking kingdoms in new regions. As the Vikings settled across Europe, they brought their customs, traditions, and way of life with them. If Ragnar had led the Vikings in their expansion, these settlements could have become more permanent, shaping the future of Viking society and creating lasting Viking influence in the places they colonized. The Vikings and their legacy beyond Ragnar's death. Even after Ragnar's death, the Viking legacy continued to shape Europe and the world. The Viking Age had a profound impact on the development of European culture, trade, and politics. However, Ragnar's survival could have meant an even stronger and longer-lasting legacy. Without Ragnar's death, the Vikings might have continued their raids and conquests at an even greater pace. This would have meant a more entrenched Viking presence across Europe, particularly in England, Ireland, and France. Viking influence in these regions might have continued for centuries, affecting everything from language and culture to politics and trade. Moreover, the Vikings were master explorers. Ragnar's survival could have led to more voyages of discovery, possibly even reaching new lands. The Vikings had already explored North America centuries before Columbus, and Ragnar's leadership could have pushed them even further. If Ragnar had continued to lead, the Vikings might have established even more far-reaching settlements, potentially altering the history of the Americas and other parts of the world. The question of what would have happened if Ragnar Lothbrok had lived longer is a fascinating one. From the strengthening of Viking unity to the expansion of Viking territories, Ragnar's survival would have had far-reaching consequences for the Vikings and the world at large. His leadership, military prowess, and diplomatic skills would have shaped Viking society for generations to come. His extended life could have kept the Viking Age alive longer, leading to more raids, more conquests, and a more entrenched Viking presence in Europe. The legacy of Ragnar Lothbrok would have endured far beyond his death, and the world might have been shaped by his influence for centuries. Ragnar Lothbrok's legacy would have undoubtedly left a lasting mark on history had he lived longer. Not only would the Vikings have maintained their strength and unity under his leadership, but his wisdom and strategies could have reshaped European politics for centuries to come. The Vikings' influence on trade, culture, and exploration might have expanded even further, perhaps even reaching places we never thought possible. The Viking Age could have been prolonged, and the impact of Ragnar's survival would have continued to inspire future generations of warriors and leaders. Europe, and perhaps even the rest of the world, would have looked very different today. What do you think? Could the Vikings have dominated Europe for longer if Ragnar Lothbrok had lived? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this historical journey, make sure to hit the subscribe button and stay tuned for more fascinating what-if explorations. Thanks for watching, and until next time, keep diving into history. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Viking history and want to see more explorations of what-if scenarios, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with your friends. We've got more exciting content coming your way. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.